Welcome to part 3 of the JSON placeholder API tester. So we've completed the application, applied some styling to it. We can select the posts individually and that outputs them to the page. Any post that is shown, it's editable. So if we want to make changes to the post, we can do that and update the body contents and then save it to the server. The server gets the new saved item and it sends it over to the server. We can also, and it does a response back, so it automatically adds it to the page. That's why we've got the ID4 and ID4 added twice. We can delete any of the items on the page as well, so we added in the delete method request. We can load all of the posts that are currently available, so it just appends it to the output area. So these are all of the posts. Select any one of them, make updates to them. And whenever we make updates, save it to the server, it's going to add the newly updated version with the ID at the top. You can also select, delete any one of them. And then also in addition, you can add items and content. So add objects, and that just automatically adds it to the top. So it gives it a new ID. And then you can select these and update them, save them, and also delete them. And the reason it's throwing an error there is because this is still the testing server, so only have up to ID 101, and as we're trying to delete something above the 100, so we only have all of the posts, and this is the default data, so it's not actually updating the database. So we can throw errors, and some of those errors, they're not actually errors within the code, they're errors because the server is a testing server and it doesn't have over ID 100. In the last lesson, we have the ability to load all of the posts. We also have an option to add new posts. And then whenever the user selects them, we can make those posts editable. And then we also have the ability to send the data over to the server. And it's already structured within that post format. So it's going to allow us to very easily post and put that content to the server. So instead of logging it out to the console, we'll create a function to handle put item and then whatever the JSON data is that we want to send to the server. So all we have to do is stringify it and then we can post that item. So one of the other values that we also need is to get the ID. So we'll pass that into the put item function. So we already have the temporary object within a JavaScript object format, and then also just to distinguish the item as we're going to need it for the URL path, we can get the info ID. So you can also get it from the JSON ID, so that's going to be the same thing. So it's up to you. We can pass it in as just that as well, as that information ID is already being passed. So we want to grab the ID value as it's going to be part of the route where we're putting the information, and then the rest is going to be contained within the body. So getting the JSON and ID value, and then also let's output the JSON object entirely as well. And save, load the posts, click it, and clear the console. So when we're saving it, we're getting the route for 100, which corresponds with the ID value. Also for the user ID, we can also get the user ID because it looks like it is changing, so it's not always 1. So selecting the user ID value so that it corresponds with the post data that's being output. So let's create the put request, and this is actually going to be very similar to what we had when we're doing the post. So we could as well create a function in order to handle that. So selecting all of this information, and I'll just create a function, make request, and then the content that we need to pass in there so we'll pass in the JSON object, and then instead of stringifying the body, we can contact that and just pass in the JSON. So that's the only value that's going to be changing from our request. and this is going to make it easier for us to make those requests. So add to page data, and we want to make the request object. This is the content body that we want to pass in. So this is our JSON object with a user ID of 1. And the URL is actually going to be the same, so we don't need the URL in here. And so we'll just make the request with JSON. We'll try it out just to make sure it works. So we create a new one. That will create the new post ID. And we also want to specify the method. So we want to send it as a post. And this also should be dynamic. So just call it meth for the method. And that way we can dynamically update and make those requests. So for the request itself, just double check and make sure it's working. So we are passing through the title, the body, and adding a new item. So where we're making the selection and doing the put item, we can simplify this and do a put request and get the temporary object. So we don't even need an extra function in order to handle that. Or if we want to keep it like this, we can just keep that function and then do the make request within this function separately. So depending on what's easier for you to read, so make the request, and the method in this case is going to be a put request. So load all of the elements and make an update to it and clear it, so send it to the server. And we also need to put to a specific path for the URL. So we also need to pass the URL in. So it looks like we need the URL value. As we're posting to a specific path, let's send the URL in and add the URL and copy the URL, so within the put value, and we want to post it to and / and let's concatenate the JSON ID to it. And so this is going to pass through the URL object. So try that one more time. And clear, so save to the server. So we do get the response back from the server on our updated item. So what it's doing is, as it's still matching the same pattern as before, where it's just making an update to our list. And of course, because this is a testing API, it's not saving to the end result. But we do have the ability to make the updates and save that updated data, send it over to the server, and then this is the response back from the server. So we do see that it matches the same parameters as the one that we saved. And so also, whenever we're saving it, we want to remove out the button, and then also remove out that active class. Or we might want to just relist all of the posts. So there's a few options there on how to handle that. So I'll do this as well, where when we do the save, we can only do it once. And then when it gets clicked, we're going to remove out the editable. So we loop through all of them, and editable will just be set to false. And we can do this because we already have the elements on the main. And we can also remove out, so remove the active class from main. So just update this to remove. And then let's take the saver button and just do a remove on it. So all posts, make an update, save the update, and so that resets it back to normal. And we can't actually re-click it because that main element only has just the once. So there's no option to reset that. So there's different ways around that, but one of the best ways is typically just to load the new content. As when you do have the server response, you wouldn't be adding it to the top. You might be handling it differently. So you might reload the new content into here, and there's various options that you can apply to the coding. So you can also delete a resource if you want. So there's a delete method as well. So let's add that option in. So if we want to delete the message from the list, and just as we added the button to save it, we also might want to have an additional button maybe at the bottom, just outside of the main, that will delete it. So this can go outside of output, as we don't want it contained within the main because we already have the event listener on main. Del button, and this will go into output, and it'll be a button, and it'll say delete item, and then we can also have the ID value. And then just add to it. And then if delete button, add event listener, and the event that we're listening for is going to be click. So when it gets clicked, we can run the delete process. So it can make a fetch request to delete the item, and then also some of the processes that we need to do as well, where we'd have to take main and remove it, delete button and remove it. So it would remove both of those from the page. And let's send our delete request. Item, and the parameters that we need to send for delete. So we just need to have a method delete and send it over to this path. So we can also do this within the same list here, where this is going to be our base URL. And then add to it the posts. So this is a very simple request, so fetch, and we're just doing a delete for it. So again, it's not going to be really deleted because this is fake. So we need to just specify the info ID for the posts and sending over this as a delete. So it's not going to actually delete it, but this is just giving us our option to delete it. And that's deleting it from the page as well. For the delete button, class list, and let's add a class of delete. And we can apply some styling to the button. So for the delete button, so do a display of block. So it goes all the way across. Width, we can set it to 50%. Margin set to auto, so it centers it. background color. So let's set the background color to red. And the color of the font can be white. And font size, set it to 1 EM. So the delete buttons, and they're being prepended, so you can do it a number of different ways as well if you want. Or you could add another div container to container and then have the button within there, and then that can just delete out the full element object that we've selected. So these ones are a little bit on top, so it's a little bit hard to see that. But this is just a styling thing that you can update as needed. And let's add some padding. So you can apply the styling however you feel best suited. Border radius, so slightly rounded buttons. And also for delete, hover, and I'll update the opacity. So all the posts, and if we click them, they're editable. The save to server button, let's add some content to that. And I'll just call it save and save. And how do we want to style this? So give it a color of green. Font can be white as well. And this is just that saver button. Font size, border radius. So I think everything else can be fine. So once we create the save button, let's add a class to saver. So class list, add, and add the class of save. So save to server, make the updates to it, save it. Let's also add some classes to these buttons and the inputs. So this is in our main output element, and I'll just look at the element. As I know, it's getting fairly complex here. We've added quite a bit of stuff here. So this is all within this top area. So let's apply some styling to these elements. And this is going to be within output 1. So output 1 and class list, add. And this is just a main container. And I'll just give it a class of container 1. So this is kind of like our controls and our dashboard. So let's just make sure that container 1 got added. So we've got the class of container 1. So we can apply the styling as needed. So let's do a font size, padding, and do a margin of auto, width of 80%. Then you can apply the styling as however works best for you. Do a text align, so center align the text. Let's also update the inputs and the buttons. So input and also the buttons. And also let's apply it to BTN, the element with the class of BTN. So making all of these big. So center, and we don't need to center align. Add some padding to it. Make it a larger font size. And actually, I think that turned out a little bit too big. So I want to have the add items to the new line. So you can apply the styling as needed as well. So the load all posts. Let's create a block object for that. So for button 1, and I'll just update the style, display, and I'll set the display to be block so that they'll have a new line for it. And let's set the margin to auto for them. And also I'm just going to add some Google fonts to it as well. So selecting the Google font, I'll do an import of it within the style elements. So, and then we'll select this and add it to the body of the page. So all of the elements will have this font family. So let's see what that looks like. And let's do a load of the posts. And make sure everything is still working properly. Going into the console, clear that and do a save. So it saved this current version as well as it creates a new one right up at the top with the same IDs. And then actually you can edit this one because you can't edit the one that was just changed. We also have the option to delete items and update items on the page. So test it out and make sure you've got all of the functionality and build a fully functional application that interacts with the JSON placeholder. Tasks for this lesson are to test out the application and make sure it's working as expected, add and try out the put and delete methods, sending those requests to the server, so updating and allowing the user to interact with the data on the page and effectively updating and interacting with the server data, so creating interactive page elements that you can save, you can delete, and you can select and update the content to. Updating the content and also interacting with the page content, and with the JSON server response data, update the page content accordingly, apply styling as needed to complete the application, and also test out the application, try out the different endpoints.